I know that it's always that time of the afternoon where you're not quite sure if you can pay attention, but we're going to go on a little adventure and let's see how we feel by the end of it. So there's one piece of dinner party conversation that a lot of us like to have, which is, did you know that the Inuit have like 30-something different names for snow? And I bet you didn't know that the Hawaiians have about 60-something names for fishing baskets, also bananas and sweet potatoes, because that's what they eat. And there's even a special Greek word for slapping someone on the face. There are all kinds of words in this area of linguistic anthropology that we can't really translate out of the cultural context. They're unique to a time, a place, and a whole framework. And Judaism has our fair share. We might try to use words like holy, great word, what is it even? Profane, sacred, and then the big ones, pure, impure, unclean, which doesn't even have such an opposite, maybe clean. And the Hebrew words that we use that are in all over not only this week's Parshiyot of Tazria and Mitzorah, but are all over this fabulous book of Vayikra, of Leviticus that we're in. And those words are Tuma and Tahara. I'm not going to say what they mean in English. Maybe we'll figure it out by the end of this. And we're just coming from a Parshat Shmini, which is where we have a Mishkan, a tabernacle that's been set up. It's about to be dedicated. And we're being told all the different situations that require us to maybe be in the space, maybe we can't be in the space, maybe we have to wait some time, maybe we have to go outside, maybe we have to get cleaned. And even in Shmini, we begin with food. There are different foods that are tameh. What does it mean? I don't know. And later, we're going to go into the whole arena of negaim, of bodily blemishes that are also applicable to clothing, also applicable to homes, things that are situation changes that impact a person's status of Tuma or Tahara. In the middle of all of that, we have Tuma and Tahara related to bodily emissions, to seminal fluids, to blood, and of course, the beginning of this week's Parsha of Tazria, childbirth. Isha ki Tazria, when a woman reproduces, she has 7 days of Tuma, and then she's permitted to her partner, but there's another 33 days where she's not able to do certain things in terms of where she can be, what she can eat. There's some kind of status change going on. Now, whether Tuma is contracted through encounter with a dead body, which is the big one, or through something that happens to your own body, natural emissions that happen to all humans who have life breath in them, or whether it's due to a situation of some kind of sickness, some kind of malady, we don't quite know what it is, we can agree on a couple things about Tuma, even if we don't know how to define it. It happens to everyone. Unless you're a high priest who is, secluded from most of these possibilities so that you really don't ever come across a dead body, or even a priest, there are certain moments where a Kohen can encounter a dead body and can contract Tuma. Everyone at some point experiences this. It's part of life. It's things to do with birth, with death, with the natural cycles of human beings and what goes on in our bodies. And the third thing we can all agree on about Tuma, it's not about hygiene. It's not about being dirty or unclean. Maybe it's certain things that you want to take a shower afterwards, but we can recognize that after you've taken a shower, there's no intrinsic hygienic issue. Okay, so what's happening when we start off this week's Parsha with the idea of childbirth? Why is that our opening that might help us understand a little bit about what Tuma is really all about? So Ibn Ezra, who was a commentator from the early medieval period who really likes to help us understand the basics of the text, gives us a very simple reason. Well, birth happens first. That's the first part of life. We all get born. Thank God. I'm so glad that you were all born. So that's how we start. And we continue on into all the other negaim. But there's something a little juicier here. And the Tzror Hamor, Rabbi Avraham Saba, who was a Spanish exile in the 15th century, he goes into a whole deep explanation that tells us that the blood that is expelled from a woman's body through menstruation or through childbirth is something that is intrinsically connected to that first moment when women are given this inheritance, let's just say, from the matriarch, from Chava, from the first woman, who's told, in pain you'll bear children, and you'll struggle in childbirth. And that initial pagam, that initial flaw in humanity, that is what is experienced in every cycle of menstruation and every experience of childbirth. And the need to sit through these 7 days, or in some cases 14 days, is related to every woman atoning for the rest of her life, for the rest of humanity, for this moment of primordial rupture. That's a pretty intense teaching, right? Do we really want to imagine that this is a sin, that this is something bad? It's not how I would like to view it. But I want to say that that's just the tip of the iceberg in Jewish mystical literature. The Zohar, which is a compendium of all kinds of Jewish mystical literature, says that the secret of a woman in Nidah, a woman who is in this state of Tuma related to her bodily emissions, that is the greatest, deepest secret of an impact that happens to the divine on such a high level. It's related to the flaw of the moon not being in her fullness, the dark side, and the darkness in all of creation, in all of humanity. It's such a deep, dark mystery that the Zohar relates it to the snake that Chava was supposedly not only told to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, but she was also seduced by this snake, and that what's left in her body is what's coming through every month. And that is the depth of this pain, this experience that's coming through when the Zohar is viewing a lens of Tuma. Now, the experience of bleeding from one's body is a very intense experience to understand when it's something that's never happened to you. And we have to remember that so many of these texts were written by people who hadn't experienced it because they were in bodies that were male. And when they write about the depth of this Tuma as this horrific thing, it makes sense. It's mysterious. No one really knows. Is it sickness? Is it something that is coming from a primordial sin, an original sin almost? That's where we have taboos that have been going on throughout human history in tribal contexts. We get told, yes, when a woman is unclean. But what's actually happening, potentially, I want to suggest, there's a profound mystery of the experience that says that Tuma is not coded bad or good or clean or unclean. Tuma almost sounds like the English word that you might have heard. It has a similar alliteration to it as trauma. And I'm not talking about the clinical form of trauma, although that can relate, but trauma as impact. Something happens to you, you react. There is a shift, there is a change in the body. And when we look at all the different categories of what brings about a state of Tuma, we can understand that many of them are related to an experience of trauma in the cycle of life. Professor Jonathan Milgram says about the whole book of Vayikra that most of the scenarios that bring upon Tuma are things related to what God doesn't do. Birth, death, sex. They're all things that are very, very human, but they're things that God doesn't do. So because there's a bit of a rupture there, there's a bit of a dissonance, that's why we have to do all of these rituals to realign ourselves with the divine. But I want to posit something different. What if Tuma is so aligned with the things that God supports humans in doing that makes us human? The best part of it, the juice of life, is not just life. The juice of life is the cycle. Just like every morning we wake up and we have the sunrise, and then we have midday, which is bright and sunny, and then the sun goes down and we have midnight and things get dark and cold. And just like we have the spring and everything is beautiful outside, and we have a great summer, and then it becomes fall and everything becomes dark and cold, and then we regenerate again and we have rebirth again. And the cycle of death, the cycle of letting go of the potential for life, whether that is in the Tuma that is contracted through a dead body, whether it is in the Tuma through a seminal emission or a blood emission from the menstrual cycle, or whether it is the Tuma of childbirth, which we'll talk about in a second, are all related to a very profound godly divine presence that then disappears because of the cycle. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz talks about how Tuma is the moment when the charge of life force, the current, starts to go backwards in the body or in the object, because there's a whole bunch of laws about objects as well. It's when there's something so potent and so vibrant and so life-filled, and then suddenly the status changes, the status shifts. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. In fact, how come different things can and can't contract different levels of Tuma? For example, a snake, the Talmud says, barely contracts Tuma at all because it doesn't have that level of life force energy. It's considered to be a lowly animal. So, okay, there's not that much Tuma. There's not even any possibility of contracting Tuma. But when a human is giving birth, when a human is going through their cycles of life, there is such a strong divine presence and then shifts. The Talmud in Tanit tells us that there are 3 keys that God doesn't want to entrust to human beings. They're too potent and powerful. One is the key to reign. One is the key to Tchiyat HaMeitzim, to resurrection. And the other one is the key to childbirth. And the Kotzker Rebbe says, childbirth is so powerful that it is something that God is a partner in. God is alive. God is present in that moment of giving birth. And with that high that happens in that moment of childbirth, there is a shift, a status change after the child is born. We know that today as the flood of hormones shifting, and that's why we have postnatal depression. And we don't have enough awareness about it in the world that this is a normal part of the state of life. We have that in people whose bodies menstruate, who we might say in society, why are you so low today? Well, there is something powerful happening in that moment when life, the potential for life, is being lost through the body. And it's also a moment of a great gift. It's a moment of intuition. It's a moment of divine connection. But it's coming from the side of divine presence that we don't see, that we don't consider to be God as God is manifest all the time. This is the side that is about death. This is the side about winter, about hibernation, about dormancy, about letting go, about shedding. So when we begin with childbirth, we understand that this moment of childbirth is something that is an intrinsically divine experience, and it's so powerful that it's not bringing upon any state of uncleanliness. If anything, it's giving an opportunity for such a strong divine connection that a person's body needs time to recover from that impact, that trauma. Likewise with any encounter with a dead body, likewise with any seminal or menstrual emissions. In our world today, we find it very hard to talk about the experience of being in the body. We want to talk about our Judaism as something that's an intellectual pursuit, about something that inspires our values. But what does it mean? Do we want Judaism to be governing how we feel about the very intrinsic experiences of living? And I want us to explore the possibilities that now that we live in a moment where we have, thank God, in a place like this, so many people of all genders, of all body experiences coming to the table, we can think about what that experience is of how we understand Tuma, not as being something unclean, not about being something dirty, but about being an intrinsic connection to the cycle of life. Tomorrow night we begin the Jewish month of Iyar. Iyar is an acronym for Ani Adonai Rafecha, I am God your healer. We're all on a path towards our own healing. We all want to experience what it is, whether it's in our body, our mind, our spirit, our heart, our mental health, to be healed. And I want to invite us that when we can start to think about how my body, how my life operates in a cycle that embraces the divine presence in death, and also the absence, the push and the pull of the cyclical nature of what it is to be a human in a body, then we can come into wholeness with ourselves, with our bodies, with the divine, and of course with the people around us. I want to thank all of you here, so many teachers and mentors who've brought me to this place, so many of my amazing colleagues, my cohort who have brought me here, all the people, if you're in Australia and it's 4:30 in the morning, please go to bed. And thank you to everybody else for being here to witness me today. Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov, and thank you again. Rabbi Taka will lead us in Kaddish D'Rabbanan.
גדל ויקדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
וילמד דברה חירותך וימליך מלכותך בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי בבתי ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו
Amen. יהי שמי רבה.
מיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי קודשה לעילה עם כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה תאמירה ויעלמה ויאמרו אמן. על ישראל ועל רבנן ועל תלמידי הון ועל כל תלמידי הון ועל כל מאן דעסקים באורייתא די ויתרה הדין ודי בכל אתר ואתר יהי להון ולכון שלמה רבה חינה וחסדה ורחמים וחיים אריכין ומזונה רביחה ופורקנה מן קודם אבוהון דבשמיא ויאמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמעיה וחיים טובים עלינו